because today we have our guest for our Lithuanian people from United States, famous professor of sociology. Yes, correct me if I'm wrong. Mr. Mark Regnerus, quite well known man for our audience, but he may tell us more about himself. And we here are on the topic of same-sex marriages and how do they influence partnership and families. And Mark had a topic on that. So starting, I will ask, maybe not only in Lithuania, there are many people who think that the legalization of same-sex partnerships and marriages is not good, but it's not also a very important issue for society. After all, there are only a few gay people, so that doesn't matter much, isn't it?
Right.
And if it is so, in your opinion, is it important, really, and how much, and why then?
Yeah. I think it is important, and it's not so much the issue of how many people want this, it's the nature of what the change actually is. And it's not as if when the government changes the nature of marriage or the definition of marriage, that actually affects how future generations of marrying couples think about what it is that they're doing. And it also signals that the state thinks of marriage as something different than it did before, right? So even if I don't think of my own marriage as different after the Obergefell decision, something has changed legally because the law itself is a teacher, okay? Obergefell won't teach me, but it teaches people who are coming up in age and will think about their own future relationships and marriage. So it suggests to people that only certain things characterize marriage now. Yes, in the past, for millennia upon millennia, the nature of marriage is about protecting the relationship between a man and a woman and the children she bears to him, right? It's a security thing. Okay, it unites. It brings him in and her in, and they have a joint investment, right, in the children that naturally occur. And so raising children is not only expensive, but it's a time-consuming, long-term investment. And so we have to have a bond that secures it. Okay, so when you think about, what changes? Well, what falls out when we have marriage as being like for everybody, what disappears is this idea that somehow children have something to do with marriage, right? So that's the first and most obvious thing that disappears in this case, is that you don't any longer have this idea that children are a central component of marriage. And still globally, even though people marry later in Lithuania, it's the average age is marriage is really high. They still intend or consider children a fairly important part of this. But you add same-sex marriage to this mix, like children are not a central component of this. Yes, women wish for children more than men do on average, so you'll see for two women marrying, they will often seek to have a child, but less than half of them, for sure. But they'll have to have this child some other way. So it involves bringing in another series of laws around who can adopt children? Do we permit surrogacy? Do we permit artificial reproductive technology? All of these things are immediately engaged in this conversation. When you look at men, right? Two men do not really, generally speaking, are not itching to have children, right? And if they have children, then they have to find them in even more creative ways than two women do, right? Because a child is, when there's a child involved, there is always a woman involved, right? But for men, same-sex marriages do not equate to children, okay? So we've already said, okay, if that's a marriage, we've already kind of thrown out children as kind of a central expectation and principle and priority in all marriage, right? So opening the door to different kinds of marriages, and really we're talking about three kinds. A marriage between two men, a marriage between two women, and then man and woman marriage, as has long been known. These two new kinds of marriages are different, and they have different expectations, and they become, what is highlighted in them is sort of this distinctively consolidating male interests and preferences, distinctively highlighting and consolidating women's preferences. So what you find in this, when you open the door to this, you have men who are far less likely to have a monogamous marriage than if you're married to a woman. And among women, you have a far higher rate of dissolution and breakup because the expectation for a deep emotional relationship is kind of magnified because you have two women. So it's the preferences that men and women tend to bring. I don't dispute same-sex marriage because it's about gay or lesbian people. It really has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the consolidation of two same types, right? So when we do that, we basically send a message to all of the people, everybody, that marriage is no longer about children. For men, it's no longer about monogamy. For women, it's principally about emotional fulfillment and less about children. And it elevates the risk of dissolution because, in the United States, most divorces are instigated by women because of this. They have higher expectations for marriage than men do. Well, we might say, well, men should have higher expectations. We're talking about deeply rooted evolutionary preferences. Those don't change overnight. Those don't change in 1,000 years. So we're talking about two very different types. So when you open the door to same-sex marriage, you're changing its meaning for everybody going forward. You're signaling to the people that something fundamental has changed for all of you.
Okay, I see. And you have released your new book. I've just got this. Thanks for you. It's called Future of Marriage, yes? Am I right?
It's called The Future of Christian Marriage.
Christian marriage, yes, actually.
But the book is actually more about Christians seeking marriage. I went out to see what's unique about Christian marriage, and what I find is the similarities is that it's about marriage as most people have understood it, Christian or not, and about how Christians seem to be moving into a position where they are the banner holders, the standard bearers for marriage in general in the future, because apart from religion, marriage recedes more quickly.
I see. That was the idea of your book, and this one I haven't read still, sorry, but we had two topics of yours during this conference, but I would like you yourself to tell what did you come to tell for the audience of those pro-family organizations of Central and Eastern Europe here in this conference? Maybe something special you wanted to reveal here about that?
I don't think I came and said anything that was not discernible from me in previous writings and previous talks. Although I did talk about sort of some of the changes that are happening in the sort of social, political, and legal and academic situations in the last several months to a couple years. You know, like what should we expect next? And one of the things I talked about is that there's this move afoot within the sort of academic publishing industry to clamp down on, published research that can be true, empirically, accurate, solid, excellent research methods, and yet if it seems to be potentially harmful to some minority, the new guidance from journal editors is not to publish it, right? So this is just a earth-shattering change around how academic publishing has always worked, right? You search for the truth of things, right? And wherever that may lead, okay? This is, in the United States we have tenure, which sort of protects academic freedom, and the point of it is not to have lifelong job security. The point of it is to have the security to seek the truth where it leads you. And so, but now, this guidance that's come down from the journal Nature and the Springer Corporation of journals has suggested that it's no longer about this obvious, unfettered search for empirical truth. It's about, watch out, if your truth is potentially harmful to the rights of minorities, then it shouldn't be published, right? And it's not just about like race, ethnic, and sexual orientation. The list goes well past that. Political minorities, religious minorities. I can't think in social science of too many topics that where you write upon them, they have no influence at all upon some minority somewhere. It is almost as if the whole industry could be suppressed by this. In reality, they don't think it's going to be suppressed at all. It'll just, make it harder for people to publish upon particular minorities. I just think, the usages of data is at some level a different kind of question than the data itself. What is going on in the social world? That is fair game for everybody. We suppress that. We're not telling the truth to people, right? How people use truth, how political parties use empirical truth. We can't control that. We might have interests in it, but that's a completely different move afoot from the nature of empirical inquiry and findings. For a very long time, that was kind of sacred, right? The right to pursue understanding and truth. And now it's subsumed to the right to protect perceived vulnerable minorities. And I just think it's a danger to the scientific enterprise. And it's coming from the top.
And the science, as we know it, probably could be crushed. And these points have to do with your personal life story, I believe so.
A little bit.
Maybe
we're a survivor.
It's quite wide known, but it's always good to have a privilege to hear it, to have it from the tongue. So I'll ask you about yourself. Mm-hmm. So you are quite well person in the world, but from the beginning. Why did you choose this particular part as scientist? And why did you not stop even when you received a lot of this resistance? The kind of, you are telling us now, only they had to push you back or clamp you down after you did something, this famous 2012 article, and you had even some persecution. So why didn't you have this just job for life, convenience?
You know, it's connected to this kind of outrage I feel about this latest scientific editorial guidance. I mean, I got into sociology because I'm fascinated by the social world. I'm fascinated by social forces, social structures, these kind of invisible things that press us in one direction rather than another. They can be oppressive, but they can be freeing, and they can be nurturing of very good things. Anyways, I was fascinated by it, and I always have been, always will be. But then, you know, and I was a sociologist of religion, writing about religion for a very long time, and not really making any waves, but happy-go-lucky. And, you know, right around 2009, I started getting interested in the question of sort of marital decline, marital rates decline, things like that. And so I started writing about this subject, and then in 2011 and 12, I took up the issue of same-sex households and children. That's what, of course, made me famous or infamous. Yeah, there was a lot of pushback then, a ton. You know, you've got to gut it out. You've got to stay with, I mean, frankly, if opponents come after you and you capitulate, a restoration to whatever it is you wanted is not simple, right? So like, the idea of when sharks smell blood in the water, you know, they go for you, like, and so giving some sort of tepid apology, or even falling all over yourself apologizing, won't work. But I wasn't interested in that, because I'm interested in understanding the world as it is, okay? And I'm also interested in sort of the health and flourishing of marriages and families everywhere. So I knew that, you know, A, I had nothing to apologize for. B, there was no significant mistakes in the study. Fundamentally, there's a dispute about, a little bit about language. We can fix that. It's not a big deal. But there's a dispute about, like, well, how do we study and how do we come to results and conclusions around different kinds of households and different kinds of family structures. And so fundamentally, you know, is it a dirty secret? It's not a dirty secret. It's just the way you get to know differences in between different kinds of households with very different experiences is by controlling statistically for the pathways by which difficulty arises, particularly like in same-sex households, single-mother households, step families, etc. You know, people don't like the idea of there being a gold standard, but I mean, like, the lifelong union of a father and mother who are married happily, hopefully, but their marital happiness is not as important as their marital security for their children. This is the gold standard. Now, it doesn't mean children can't flourish or be fine in other scenarios. But, you know, I'm a sociologist. I want to know how patterns and norms are working, how it works in the aggregate. And, you know, the findings of that study aren't wrong. It hasn't been retracted yet. But now the guidance I just told you about invites editors to go back in time and to tag pieces that they don't like, or even to retract them, even though they're factually correct, because they're politically incorrect. That is bad news. That is sad. So will it change how I operate? No. I'm just not afraid. And you can be surprised at how fearful tenured, well-paid professors can be, right? I mean, they can act like teenagers, and they can be as insecure as teenagers. For what reason, I do not understand.
Okay, I see. Then on that point, is interesting to start getting into Lithuania, you know, from the conclusions of your life stories and your path. As this one is also mine practice of life, that we meet quite often a number of intellectuals, not all of course, but who are scientists, other kind of also, who tend to, they are not like these teenager professors, as you told, they are strong, at least I believe in, but they tend to refrain from expressing their opinion or doing certain activities, even scientific activities, just in order, you know, to avoid possible unpleasantness, somehow to defend this job of life.
Yeah.
While we have pretty same issues in Lithuania, as you told about the United States, even though it could be seen not only in the science field, but also on lots of different issues about how, with what you can go public and with what you cannot. Sometimes it's called cancel culture.
Yeah.
So what would you tell these intellectuals
Right.
by your experience?
Yeah. No, other people have done similar things to me and have not fared as well as I have. I mean, I've retained my job. I eventually got promoted again. So I recognize that some people, you know, if you do whatever I did, it doesn't mean that it's going to work out well for you. But I didn't know it was going to work out well for me either. I mean, there's something about the pursuit of truth for its own sake that is worth doing, no matter what the costs. But you know, we need to support each other and reinforce each other, because the threat of cancel culture is exacerbated today because of social media. I mean, yeah, I long for and reminisce about the days when, you know, there was no electronic journal publications, and if you wanted to read an article, you had to go to the library and pick it up. And now it's downloadable and shareable, etc. And the kind of review, used to be just peer review to get into the journal in the first place. Now there's peer review, there's social media review, there's the review of your colleagues. It's not good for science to have so many sources of new constraints. Yeah, it can't be helped, really. But scientists really have to gut it out, push through this, and remember that why did you get interested in this in the first place, right? You love this stuff, don't you? And a career is not there for self-protection. A career is there to sort of, especially in the academy, to educate the public and to, I know people who hide their entire academic lives, which is just, it's sad, right? I mean, why were we given these gifts, and why did we foster these gifts and these passions just to sort of hide them under a bushel, right? I mean, that doesn't make sense, So it's frustrating, but it's common, and people are scared. But we have to grow a little courage.
Okay, I see. So as we came now a little bit to Lithuanian actualities, and as we know your time is quite limited, so let us finish our talk with Lithuania, as we hope to meet you next year. We'll still not announce the date in the conference in Lithuania. You were invited. Thanks a lot. You have agreed on that. And then I already know you have to deal something, at least with the Lithuanians or Lithuania. What's your opinion or what's your idea? What do you know about us? What do you know about Lithuania already? One thing, and maybe from what you know and from what we were talking about the topic, maybe you already have some ideas. What about you would like to tell Lithuanians?
Right. I dabble in this kind of work throughout Central and Eastern Europe with different countries. And so each country has their own kind of unique, well, not just culture around families and marriage, but also their unique political situations. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that I have trouble keeping straight, and keeping track of. And, coming from a sort of bicameral representative legislature in the U.S., House and Congress, to parliamentary systems and how legislation moves through those, it's always a little bit more of a mystery to me about what are the status of things. So I'm never quite clear about what's going on in any particular country, and I'll ask and I'll try to how do you translate that to a system that I'm familiar with? So I don't quite get the picture about where things stand in Lithuania, but I've had friends there for several years now, and I've been there twice, briefly both times, over the last 5 or 6 years, and it's been great. I love it. It's part of the old Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, dear to my heart. And I just want to be of assistance and help and in understanding kind of the social science around this, because if we leave it to just one voice, you don't see the diversity of research and results in the social sciences around marriage and family. You just hear it from one or two sources. So it's important to hear and to see what's going on, and it's kind of a global portrait around these topics.
Okay, so you'll present us some global, more kind of global standpoint for the things happening, which we know happening in Lithuania. Isn't that? So we were very glad and honored to meet you. Thank you, for your interview. It was really interesting.
Good. Appreciate it.